that still emphasize that crafts training in apprenticeships is substantial. And I think this speaks to the continued importance of apprenticeships for the passing on of craft skill. But again, like the apprenticeship mode is not static. We see, for instance, contemporaries in the 1950s highlighting that while training in crafts has previously mainly taken place within the family or within lineage units, we see now from the 1950s more and more change, more and more outsiders learning crafts that have previously been passed on from within families or within lineages. So if we can move on one slide, please. So what I've tried to create is a complex and fragmented outline of the relationship between women and crafts and artisanal labor. And with regards to my specific topic, the question then is, how did women get into goldsmithing? And for Ghana, the literature suggests that this became possible around the 1960s and due to formal institutions teaching the profession. University training, dedicated colleges and schools are seen as important as their offerings worked against beliefs that women should not engage in iron melting or goldsmithing. However, in Nigeria, we don't see a comparable institution emerging. At times, short-lived private initiatives were launched, but didn't seem to go very far. So for Lagos specifically, we see, for instance, in 2012, Nima Oduni launching the Lagos Jewelry School, where lots of women trained to become goldsmiths. And it was only in 2022 that a government initiative to train goldsmiths was launched in Abuja. So for the late 1980s, one woman I interviewed suggested that for her, the entry in the profession came when her parents could not afford further school education and sent her to train with her uncle. Another woman I interviewed suggested a similar configuration for the 1970s. She wanted to learn fashion design when there was no more money for her to continue school. And at the age of 16, her sister introduced her to a female goldsmith, and that's how she took a liking to the profession. And yeah, this woman also suggested that her boss was one of the first women to learn the profession. So we can assume that this woman's boss learned around the 1960s. And if you can click once, just so the text on the side shows up, maybe. Exactly. So in the in one edition of the Nigerian magazine on Nigerian jewelry, there's in 1962 made reference to one woman goldsmith, who's acclaimed to be the first lady goldsmith in West Africa. And I think Nigeria and Ghana can battle it out who had the first woman goldsmith on this one. So the 1960s is also in the literature referred to as a time where the entry of women in formal professions became more socially accepted. And this seems to be perhaps true for crafts as well. And at the same time, as Bolan Leawe suggests, it could have also been that it was more due to a shortage of practitioners that facilitated women's entry into the profession. So that's also to consider. Yeah, I think what I also wanted to emphasize here is that we can appreciate the importance of role models, especially with reference to the one woman I was talking to, but also talking to these women about whom they trained. And both of them sort of said when they were learning to become goldsmiths, they were one amongst 10 other women to learn the profession. And they themselves have taught more than 10 women to become goldsmiths. So we see the potential that there's quite a substantial amount of women goldsmiths in Lagos. I'd like to move on with the next slide. And the third part, we know from colonial archival material for Nigeria and in particular Lagos that the goldsmith profession was booming in the 1940s and 1950s. On Lagos Island alone, which was then featuring about 270,000 inhabitants, more than 300 goldsmiths were registered with the colonial administrations. And the goldsmiths I had the chance to speak to also refer to the 1970s as another heyday for the profession, which we might associate with the oil boom. But they explicate that since then, and particularly in the 1980s, the profession underwent change, and they bemoan that it has been in decline since. This we can associate with economic crisis and structural adjustment programs, but also with a deteriorating security situation. In the 1980s, it became increasingly risky to wear gold out because of robberies. And this security situation also affected the display and storage of gold, as well as the selling and buying on the streets. And what I would also like to argue is that changes in fashion choices might have also contributed to changes in the profession. I would like to argue that for the 1970s, what is called custom jewelry was gaining importance. And this also had repercussions for the day-to-day work of goldsmiths. One of the goldsmiths I interviewed, Baba Ibeji, mentioned eleganza jewelry when we spoke and explained that they were producing imitation jewelry based on designs they saw goldsmiths making. That is to say, they were very quick in adapting to the current fashions, but were able to produce the jewelry much cheaper. And Razak Okoya, the owner of Eleganza, explained in various newspaper articles that in the late 1960s and 70s, he saw how people spent large amounts of money on jewelry and thought that this could be done cheaper and with metals from Nigeria. That's how he put it. And so the way he puts it, like it could be done quicker, cheaper, and at the same time would allow women, especially market women, to look like his wife. Yeah. Exactly, very fashionable. So with the emergence of eleganza and the rising popularity of custom jewelry, goldsmiths were nevertheless busy producing jewelry around the times of festivals, according to Baba Ibeji, which is also sort of where we see the boom of jewelry production in the 1940s and 50s. But costume jewelry only required washing and potentially repair, unlike with gold jewelry. Costume jewelry can't be used to create a new design or a new piece, which is true for gold jewelry. So the last part, adaptation and these networks of trust. So how did women adapt to changes, the economic challenges, and sort of these changing attitudes with regard to goldsmith products? One male goldsmith I interviewed illustrated adaptation by highlighting that when crisis hit, some women left the profession behind totally, while others went into selling jewelry. And other sources confirm this, that women, if their circumstances allowed, were focusing on the sale of jewelry. And for this, some were hiring journeymen to produce jewelry, or they were, in a sense, ordering pieces in bulk from goldsmiths, but not producing themselves anymore. And another opportunity, which also allowed women who were not trained in goldsmithery to join this profession, was the sale of ready-made jewelry from abroad. People traveling to Beirut and later on to Saudi Arabia to buy ready-made gold and sell it in Lagos. And this sale of ready-made jewelry became attractive, as one woman goldsmith sort of explained to me, since the price of ready-made jewelry was decreasing to the point that it was the same price as handmade jewelry. And this made people sort of choose ready-made pieces over jewelry-made pieces. So the final section, I will now turn to these networks of trust. So what I could gather from the women I spoke to and who were still practicing the profession, establishing and maintaining trust was of crucial importance for their survival. In fact, all the goldsmiths I talked to highlight that the profession is very risky, that goldsmiths need to be patient, but also careful, that they would describe it as in the sense of not conducting themselves anyhow. They emphasize how important it is to be good with people to earn their trust, to establish and maintain good relationships with customers to ensure their continued patronage, and also for winning customers through referrals. So I would like to illustrate two brief examples of how goldsmiths mobilize trust and how this might relate to networks of trust. Firstly, and with regards to work practices, we see a change in practices that we might associate with trust. In the 1950s, goldsmiths were requested to keep record books, detailing the gold and the pieces they were working on, and the goldsmiths were keeping those orders and pieces and customer gold for periods of time in their own workshops. And this was still true in the 1970s. Gold and pieces were kept in specific bags, sometimes in banks, but these banks were central. And customers, again, would be given a date in the future, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks in the future for when they could collect their pieces. And quite differently, the women I spoke to, they emphasized that today they would try to finish a job as quickly as possible. They were striving to return pieces on the same day they were receiving them to minimize risk for themselves, but presumably also to maintain the trust of customers. So what we can perhaps conclude is that the tools and the materiality and the practices for creating trust and credibility have changed, that they have become concentrated solely in the person of the goldsmith. They are stripped from any technology or mechanism. It's literally about the trust in the person. No record keeping or anything will sort of ensure trust. And this again emphasizes the relationships the goldsmith has to establish and to maintain. And the second point I would like to make is that if we look at the relationships between customers and goldsmith and sort of seek to map these networks, we might argue that these networks emerge out of a mutual relationship of trust. So the women I talked to, once they had finished their years of learning, their apprenticeships, and sort of when they also had finished all their service for their masters, two of them established shops in Mushin. After marrying, they moved their shops, one of them to Bariga and the other one to Ikorodu. But because this was where their husbands were based. When I asked them about their customers, both emphasized that the majority of their customers were still in Mushin, that the majority of their work was there, that they would go regularly to Mushin for work. And this was despite of both of them having established their shops in Bariga and Ikorodu for like more than 30 years ago. So this might, of course, speak to the availability of business in Mushin, but it could also speak to the ways in which such networks of trust are no sort of one-way street. They are mutually created by customers and goldsmiths, and that for goldsmiths, the minimization of risk or trust also seems to be bound to very specific locations to which they have established a long relationship. Yes. So that would be it. I can briefly summarize, or I don't know how I.
How brief?
Say again?
How brief? Okay. That looks brief to me.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I've highlighted how colonial interest in women and crafts focused initially on domestic crafts, but sort of from the 1920s and 1930s, colonial administrators, but also anti-colonial politicians emphasized crafts as a livelihood for women. And I have argued that while crafts education as part of education policies is important, the institution of apprenticeships enjoyed and enjoys continued significance, particularly since there are no formal ways of training, becoming a goldsmith in Lagos. I elucidated how women goldsmiths became more visible from the 1960s, at about the same time when women moving into a variety of professions became more socially acceptable. I talked about the heydays for goldsmithing in the 1950s and the 1970s and decline, which goldsmiths attribute to the 1980s, economic crisis and the security crisis. And in this context, I have also referred to eleganza jewelry and how the pace of the profession has changed. I've shown how women adapted to changes in the profession by focusing on the sale of jewelry, and I've sought to illustrate that the ways in which trust between customers and goldsmiths is established has changed, and how customers and goldsmiths sort of co-create networks of trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Is our final speaker, Tinyan Otuomagi, in the room? Tinyan.
The last speaker.
Yeah, is our scheduled last speaker with us, Tinyan Otuomagi from Queen's University in Canada. Not online. Okay. Okay, so in that case, we've got plenty of time for Q&A, and we still won't be last in the dinner queue. So anybody got any comments or questions for either of our speakers?
Regards to the house. I want to commend the presenters, presentations. My question actually directed to kitchen. So I commend your work based on the fact that you are considering kind of changing that. Within the market setting, of which almost every form of that comes with a kind of challenges, or the kind of challenge or kind of issue or difficulties. And I'd like to know if there are challenges you feel or you think while consulting this research that probably there are challenges encountered by women while they undergo this good speaking or crafting. If there are, I would like to know, just like you know that as the women in our work today are trying to undergo a kind of change, that they want kind of change to so we notice that they come up with different reports that there are issues of probably harassment and the likes. So I don't know, probably there are kind of issues like that exist in the process of bookmaking, because in the production process and the manufacturing, the distribution process. So possibly if there are, so it's like to thank you.
If we take, I've got four questions lined up, 5 questions lined up. If we take 5 questions and then have responses. So you're number 2. Yeah.
I think mine just a comment on both presenter. I think looking at the 2 topics, I also discovered that the topics fall within the informal sector of the economy. And we also discover that sharing of knowledge, if you look at it in context of Nigeria, the first speaker, what you said that, you are concentrating your research in Lagos, which is based out Southwest base. But Yorubas, being their culture, very difficult to share, to have a rivalry when it comes to business. Why in the West and in the Southwest, Southeast, they like to accommodate their brothers and bring them exposed, the business ideas, to their brothers. Because of the culture that are imbibed in the Southwest, they don't want to entertain rivalry of business. So why Igbos, the Southeast, we bring their brother within their, and begin to mentor them and train them until they are right to stand on their own. And also, you said something, I'm talking about to catering now, that one of the challenges I want to comment about is that if you have taken us along the history line, how the goal, I wish I was enjoying it so seriously, and I wish you can still continue. However, we must also not need to, we must not also not downplay the role of Western education in this exercise. In those days, when a child grows up, the mother or the father has already established you must learn a trade. But as soon as Western education came up, they told us that Western education is a gold mine. And once you go to school, you can fly. And currently now, there is a serious need in informal sectors, because I did the research in informal sector, I can talk. Most of them are facing such challenge of who they are going to mentor build it whatever straight. There's nobody who want to come and learn the work any longer. And this is serious challenges, and it's making, I'm even surprised that you can find goldsmith in Lagos, because I've been looking for the so-called called Alagbede in those days. We have them all around, but nowadays I can't find them. They are dead. So that's just my own comment. Thank you.
In line with what he has just said, I think in our own area, that is Southeast Igbos, we have a Igba boy or apprenticeship. It's for both girls, boys and girls. Whatever you have, you want to learn, but it is business because you don't train for free. The master will train and you pay. As you pay and you are being trained, you will also be working, making money. The record of what you made while under apprenticeship will be there with the master. In the end, you will be what we call it, iduno. The master will give you some amount or start whatever it is that you are trained for, and then you go your own way. I don't think there is any fear that somebody I trained will now be master or whatever. It doesn't hold in the East. Both boys and girls, whatever trade you want to learn, you have the freedom to go and learn. Then coming to, I am shocked that women go for goldsmithing. I didn't know. It's only men that I've seen in the past when we had goldsmithing. I have not come across any goldsmith again in my area. I don't know what happened to them. Maybe because of the importation of the foreign one from Dubai, London, France, and so on. So it's very interesting for us to start it again. This blacksmithing, to do it on our own. Because we have the gold, we have the raw material. The problem is just sitting down and putting it together as we said, entrepreneurship.
Thank you. Thank you. On the phone, yes.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Your research is an interesting one. Took me back to my grandma. I started trying to figure out the last time I saw a goldsmith anyway. So but my question, and I think I just want to pick your interest if it comes to you this way, that what is that one singular thing we can do? Do you think it is still competitive for women to go back to build the businesses, having the manufacturing sector focusing on that, and coming up with ready-made that you can just pick? And then if it is not possible, what then can be done to, push this forward? People are benefiting from it. It's a skill, taking people out of the streets and things like that. So what can be done to, I think it's something we shouldn't lose we shouldn't lose and let go of. Thank you very much. And then to the second presenter on knowledge sharing. I really liked your topic. And I like the fact that you went to, you said you wanted to go to market women to ask them how they shared knowledge. I was very excited. And then you said you gave them questionnaires and so I don't want you to be afraid of any market women. They are ready to talk to you and they really love to talk to you. I'm on research presently on local business women in Lagos State to understand how resilient they are. And the strategy I adopted with my field workers is to say, you know what? The first thing you tell them is, I'm buying from you, no matter how small it is. And then you take a seat beside them. If you come with a paper, I don't have the time. I don't want to talk to you. But if you say, even if it's just 100 naira gari or whatever, or I want to buy gari, do you have a place I can buy a cup and drink my gari here? Already you've established the network of trust she was talking about. And then she's able to respond to you. And then you snowball. Do you have anybody else who can give me responses or talk to me the way you've spoken to me? She will readily, happily give that to you. And then I think saying that you didn't get a response itself, I think, I don't know how to put it, but I think you also got a response. And the fact that they didn't collect your questionnaire. It's also knowledge that they are sharing with us. So thank you very much. We hope to see more light on that paper. Thank you.
I listened to the last presentation. Liked it. The fact that you noted that security is one of the problems of goldsmithing in Nigeria. It's very true, at least from my personal experience with gold users. They tell you, even if you want to just rent, you know the rent in my area, the South, Port Harcourt area. Yes, we rent for occasions. You don't need to really put them in rent. You could also sell to those people. Now, could it be that it's a tribal thing? Because in Port Harcourt, you have the northerners, monopolizing that trade. And when you ask, they tell you there's a big man that you must take permission from to sell gold. Yes. You can research. Sangana Street is there. Benin Street is there. You can research and you will discover that. So I'm wondering that if these ones now, we call them palasa in my place. Yes. If they are imported and they are good business, instead of relying on Lagos and Onitsha for us to buy and so on, people could establish that so that they leave the real gold now that is very, very risky, and then begin to do this. Yes, do the so that even the big golds now, they produce them at Dubai, I know. They are like 1 carat, but they are just like, they are safer to own. Nobody will break your house when you have that. And once they come and see it, they know it's really nothing. 14? Is that one not very high? It is one. 14 is also at least when my daughter was getting married, I know that what I got was 1. The man told me specifically that this thing is 1 carat. But if you see it's big. So is it possible that I know nothing is impossible these days with women, but how do we tackle the security challenge? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kudos for the speakers as they really tried. I love the presentations and the topics today. But I just want to call our attention, draw your attention to, you mentioned Alagbede. Alagbede is different from
I know.
So Alagbede, that's blacksmith. Goldsmith, the Alagbede, that the one that produce corn, glasses, and the rest. Why the goldsmith concentrate on gold, jewelry? Thank you.
Okay, I will be brief. I wanted to know, Caterina, if the life course approach was important, for the biography was important to your methods, because I would like to know more about the determinant factors that brought these women to this specialization that you said it's very masculine. And in a way, maybe from the anthropological point of view, I wanted to know also how is it seen and eventually commented, the link between women and fire and metal. If you got some comments like women like men or impurity or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Should we take this in a presentation or so you want to go through
Okay, I'm telling for suggestion. So I will take note of that. So let's start with you. If we try to back or feel attention there, that it will motivate them and feed the question. Not that we did not get response, but the response that we got was slow. So I will try to take it to your advice next time we go for the field work. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to start with the question about challenges. So the kinds of tasks and challenges that come with the profession, or especially for women. One I would sort of say there's a couple of stereotypes, and one of the persistent ones is it's about physical strength. Sort of this idea that goldsmiths hammer the gold and, it's very intense. And then another sort of stereotype is one woman goldsmith said that one of her customers invited her to a party once and then sort of was very surprised. You clean out very nice. So sort of being surprised, associating goldsmith to work with being dirty, for instance. But that, in a sense, is also what I've noticed what goldsmiths, I would tell them, are you very secretive? And they say, yes, goldsmiths, we don't carry our work out. So if they are next to a tailor shop, they always say, if you go to a tailor, you see how much work they have because you see the sort of the amount of cloth that is on the table. Whereas goldsmiths, you don't know how much work they actually have because it can be a small piece of gold and who knows what they are making. So this sort of secretive, not being too flamboyant is in a way sort of how I see goldsmiths comporting themselves. And with regards to physical strength, I put this to one woman goldsmith and she said there's no challenge. With age, there's a challenge of the physicality of working the material, but there's no challenge for women in a sense sort of dealing with the physicality. And I mean, there's also different tools and machines that goldsmiths use, which sort of greatly facilitate. So yeah, the image of the goldsmith hammering the gold, most of them have a rolling mill, so that also takes the physical challenge out in that sense. So that was the first thing that my mind went to when you asked that question. The question about sort of what we both were talking about falls into the informal sector. I'm glad the last slide I put up is goldsmiths would have to register. Since the colonial time, they would have to register with the administration, with the colonial administration. It was the inspector of mines, it was an inspector of police, they had to do tests. So I don't know how informal this profession then is, in a sense. But then on the other hand side, the kinds of services, the kinds of washing of gold, sort of these kinds of practices, I would, in a sense, nevertheless associate with what is often described as more informal ways of work. So I would say they sort of sit in between, because up till today, sort of the licensing is important, especially if you deal with material like gold. And the other point you made, sort of, who is taking over the businesses, sort of this challenge to, and I think it ties in with the next question, this not seeing goldsmiths, the idea that goldsmithing as a profession is sort of vanishing. That's what I kind of try to mention, that goldsmiths themselves bemoan that very much. They say no one has the patience anymore to learn the professions, because it does take 3 to 4 to 6 years to learn the profession. And even if you've learned the profession, you will always come back to learn specific skills, to share with your master techniques and things like that. So one goldsmith, I think 2 goldsmiths even said, yeah, no one has the patience. Everyone just wants to go and drive Okada. So the patience, in a sense, is lacking. And I think initiatives like the Lagos Jewelry School from Nima Oduni that I mentioned are very great initiatives. And I think this is also where we see another change in the profession. There are so many goldsmiths that offer their services, for instance, on Instagram. And Nima, when I talked to her, her business is running very well. It's like from mainly wedding jewelry, wedding rings. People still do a lot of wedding rings with goldsmiths or specific occasion jewelry. But it's again, then I think it ties into a bigger discussion about crafts and luxury, and sort of crafts and sort of more everyday use of crafted products, I think. So I don't know. So some people see the future for crafts more generally is like sort of catering to luxury segments. We see it in sort of various forms when it comes to clothes, when it comes to shoes, local producers really producing with communities, sort of this idea of crafted, made locally in Nigeria, but catering to a luxury audience is one path that people have identified. But as a historian, I'm always shy to sort of give future solutions. As you say, I'm like sort of more than narrating the history parts of it. And what I found interesting, sort of this, we heard it before about Igbo apprenticeship and knowledge sharing, that there's perhaps a bit more openness than in other contexts when it comes to knowledge sharing. What I found interesting with regards to goldsmiths, two people, one who had learned in Italy and one who had learned in Nigeria, told me the same thing, that they were working for their masters and their masters would send them on impossible tasks. So in Italy, it was like, go bring me a hot cappuccino in wintertime from a cafe that is, I don't know, far away. So by the time they had gone and come back, the goldsmith master had finished one specific task. So they had to find a solution to solve the problem of bringing the coffee back hot, to find the master actually practicing it so they could learn. And in Nigeria, the same thing. It was always being sent on errands to buy something, to organize something, when the master was doing one specific task they wanted to learn. So I think it's maybe also a form of training, sort of a broader ideas about problem solving, perhaps. I don't know how we would describe it, but I found it fascinating that it was similar ways of instruction in a sense.
So are you saying Hercules was a goldsmith?
Yes, maybe. Maybe. Yeah, I think that. The biography question, sort of the importance of biography for my research and how women came to engage with this profession. The question I start with is, how did you become involved with goldsmithing, and sort of take it from there, but I don't press too much then on biography. So from what I've gotten back, it is like sort of this idea of this woman who had like sort of this keen interest in creating something with fashion that brought her to the profession in a sense. And on the other hand side, the other woman I mentioned, I spoke to it was more, it was an opportunity. And it's also sort of a very pragmatic approach to the profession. It is a good profession. I like the profession, but there's no, when other goldsmiths sort of stress the way they like to work with their hands, that they've always seen, or that their parents saw that they have particular skills with their hands. It's not true for all goldsmiths. So for now, I have a very mixed sort of response to that. And sort of the question about women and fire and metal, that is something I'm thinking about, like in terms of my broader research project. But with regards to sort of ideas about women and goldsmithing, it's taboos are associated with fertility, with fertility, impurity, and what did I want to say? Now I can't remember what I wanted to say. But it's for some goldsmiths, this is still an issue. But when the women I talk to, they say it's not about these things. It's about your personal skill on the gold. And they emphasize this. Everyone can become a goldsmith. It's about the skill you have. So it's changing. And I found it interesting because in Ghana, it was really sort of these schools or deformalization was used as an argument for why women could enter the profession. But Nigeria didn't have these formal institutions, and women entered the profession anyways, or became more visible.
Okay. If I can claim chair's prerogative, make just one brief extra comment. When we were doing interviews around exploring the issues around Okada riders and the bans that have been implemented against Okada riders, certainly when we were interviewing people from the Ministry of Transportation, they said as well how frustrating it was that people could come into Lagos the next day, get a motorbike and go off and ride Okada. And they too bemoaned the fact that people just didn't want to spend the time in apprenticeship to learn a trade, to learn a craft. So from that side, so you mentioned, well, they just want to go off and ride a car. So that's, from the people in the Ministry of Transportation, they're saying exactly the same, exactly the same thing, exactly the same. We do have time for one or two short questions if anybody has, or is that rumbling tummies I hear? One more? Yes, okay, one more question.
About relationships. How do you manage the relation with the customer? Like, are there any different strategies of these females compared to the male goldsmiths, like to maintain the network of trust that you have mentioned? And I would also like to know, are there any stratification factors of stratifications between these female goldsmiths, like are they divided by seniorities, or do they collaborate to each other? Thank you.
Thank you.
The first question was the relationship between the customers, right?
How we manage.
How we maintain the relationships. So 3 minutes, okay, very briefly. So as I said, all goldsmiths sort of emphasize that the customer is in a sense king or queen. That it's very frustrating with the customers that even if they're not right, sometimes you have to do jobs for free just to win their trust so you can get a referral. So that is similar. That's men and women report similar about this. Then, on the other hand side, 2 women I talked to, they claim that they are better in customer care because women like to talk more. You would greet people properly, you would make customers feel at ease. So, for them, it is in a sense easier to maintain good customer relationships just by perhaps being a bit more social. That's sort of what they suggested. What I would also say is, like, if we think about customers, the majority of customers of goldsmiths are women, which in a sense also facilitates, I think, women's ability to maintain networks of trust and to also easily move between production to sort of more sale and sort of expand their business through entering networks of their customers. I hope this sort of speaks to your question. And then you asked about sort of stratification and collaboration amongst the women. So I asked goldsmiths if they collaborate. And on the one hand side, the answer I got is like, no, goldsmiths don't really collaborate. Everyone works for themselves. But then on the other hand side, of course, goldsmiths collaborate. But it's not so much organized around seniority. It's more organized around what I would say what the specific piece needs. So if a customer comes with a specific request, you would find the person who could help you produce the piece, the person who has the tools that allows you to produce that piece. So it's sort of more, or that's what I would like to argue. It's really about what that specific piece needs, which sort of shapes the way in which goldsmiths collaborate. But then, of course, there's goldsmith associations, Lagos Gold and Silversmith Association, and these are meetings where sort of prices are negotiated, where also discussions about sort of the forms apprenticeship are taking place. So there is various levels of collaboration, even though goldsmiths you would often find one goldsmith in their workshop, and it looks like they don't collaborate. So.
Well, I'm sorry, but we do need to stop now. But that doesn't stop you talking to Katharina on the way to lunch. How can I say? I don't like to boast, but I knew this was going to be a brilliant session, and it has been absolutely fantastic. Not just the speakers, but yourselves with your comments and questions. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Chair. Thank you.